There's a wall above the city of Cusco in Peru that has been sitting in the same place for roughly 600 years, and has spent every one of those years making engineers deeply uncomfortable. The stones in it are not small. Some stand taller than two grown men stacked on top of each other. Some weigh more than a loaded cargo truck. A few of the largest blocks carry estimates above 100 tons, with some researchers pushing those figures higher still. And every single one of them fits against its neighbors without mortar, without filler, without a gap wide enough to accept the edge of a coin. In the 2010 Cusco earthquake, modern concrete buildings in the city below cracked and collapsed. The ancient stone wall above did not move. Not a single joint opened, not a single block shifted. It just sat there the way it has always sat, holding together through forces that should, by every reasonable expectation, have pulled it apart. That wall is Sacsayhuaman. And for 300 years of study, the honest answer to how it was built has remained essentially the same. We are not entirely sure. Recently, something changed. A research team gathered every measurement, every laser scan, every piece of data ever collected about this site across centuries of investigation, fed all of it into an artificial intelligence system, and told it to do the one thing that no human researcher had ever managed to do before: read the entire record at once, find what human eyes had been standing too close to see. What the machine found has not made the mystery smaller. It has made it considerably larger, and the closer you follow what the AI actually reported, the harder it becomes to set aside. Start with what is actually known, because the honest version of this story does not hide the straightforward explanation. It earns its way past it. The site of Sacsayhuaman sits at an elevation of 3,701 meters on a ridge overlooking Cusco, which was the capital of the Inca Empire. Construction of the complex is documented by Spanish colonial chroniclers, who arrived in the 16th century and recorded what the indigenous population told them about the building process. The work began under the Inca ruler Pachacuti, likely around 1438 CE, and continued for several decades under his successors. The chroniclers describe thousands of workers. Some historical accounts suggest tens of thousands, laboring in organized shifts to quarry stone from locations miles away, drag those stones on rollers and ropes up slopes that would challenge a modern vehicle, and then shape them through a process of repeated hammering and grinding until they seated against each other with the precision that still astonishes visitors today. The tools recovered at the site are consistent with this account. Hammerstones made of hard, dense rock like diorite, no iron, no wheels, no draft animals capable of moving the heaviest blocks, just human muscle, organizational genius, and a technique of slow, methodical test fitting and grinding that produced results that look, to modern eyes, like something that required machinery that did not exist. Carbon dating of organic material found within the construction puts the building firmly in the 15th century. The archaeological evidence is coherent and detailed, and yet, even accepting all of it completely, the wall does not stop being strange. In May 2026, digital archaeologists working with high-resolution photogrammetry and LiDAR laser scanning published analysis of Sacsayhuaman that produced something no previous survey had managed: a point cloud containing millions of individual coordinate readings per square meter of stone surface, a digital replica of the wall accurate to fractions of a millimeter. And when they compared that digital twin against the actual structure and ran analysis software across the data, what appeared was invisible to any human eye that had ever stood in front of those stones. The contact surfaces between the blocks are not flat. They are slightly concave, curving inward on both faces where two stones meet, creating a contact profile that functions through friction and controlled micro-interlocking rather than flat surface adhesion. This is not what you get from simply grinding two stones against each other until they seat. This is the result of a builder who understood before the first chip was struck exactly what the final contact geometry needed to look like. A builder who was solving for the fit in 3 dimensions before either stone was finished. That finding alone, published and peer-reviewed, sitting in the technical literature, already poses a question the standard explanation of patience and repetition struggles to fully answer. How do you pre-plan a 3-dimensional concave contact profile on a stone weighing over 100 tons with no written plans and no ability to test fit 2 boulders the size of small houses more than once? That is the question the research team was sitting with when they made the decision that produced the findings this story is actually about. 300 years of data about Sacsayhuaman exists. It is enormous and it is scattered. It lives in handwritten expedition notes from the 18th century, in photographic surveys from the 20th, in modern laser point clouds containing billions of individual coordinates, in geological analyses, in acoustic measurements, in astronomical studies, in architectural surveys conducted by researchers from a dozen different countries working in different languages across different decades with different instruments and different questions in mind. No human being could ever read all of it simultaneously. A scholar might spend an entire career studying one terrace of one wall and not reach the next terrace before running out of time. The pile of accumulated data is simply too deep, and any single human life is simply too short. And every researcher who ever approached the site arrived already carrying a theory. The fortress theorists, the temple theorists, the astronomers, the engineers, they each came in looking for what they already expected to find, and they each found something to support their position, and left the rest on the table. The machine was brought in because the machine carries nothing. No career, no theory, no publication to protect, no grant writing on one answer over another. It arrived at the data with empty hands, and the team filled those hands with everything that had ever been measured at this place and told it one thing: find what the numbers actually say. The first thing the AI did was not what any human investigator had done first. A person walks up to Sacsayhuaman and looks at the stones. The stones are the spectacle, the vast tawny blocks glowing in the thin mountain light of the Andes, the sheer scale of the thing. The stones are what you see first, what you photograph, what you stand in front of and try to make sense of. The machine did not look at the stones first. It went for the spaces between them. It examined the joints, the seams, the geometry of the contact zones themselves, and it began cataloging the shapes of those contacts across thousands of individual joints across the entire documented surface of the site. And what it found in that geometry was not randomness. The curves and angles where stones met were not the arbitrary outcomes of individual craftsmen doing their best with difficult materials. They obeyed proportions. The same proportional relationships appeared again and again across joints between stones that came from quarry sources miles apart. Stones that, by every conventional account, were shaped by different workers in different locations at different times. The proportions repeated across the entire site, with a consistency that is not what accumulated craft knowledge looks like. It is what a mathematical system looks like. A set of rules applied across the whole complex by people who either held those rules in their heads or had some way of communicating them that has left no physical trace we have ever found. Before any of the deeper findings can land with their full weight, you need to genuinely sit with what these builders actually moved, because the numbers are not just impressive. They are the kind of numbers that force a reconsideration of what is physically possible with the tools the historical record shows were available. The largest stones at Sacsayhuaman carry weight estimates ranging from 100 tons at the conservative end to over 200 tons at the high end, with some researchers suggesting specific blocks may approach 300 tons. The nearest quarry, whose rock composition matches the largest blocks, sits miles away across terrain that drops into ravines and climbs through gradients that would strain a modern truck in low gear. The Inca had no iron tools, no wheels in use, no draft animal strong enough to move anything near that weight. The standard reconstruction, ramps of earth, rollers of logs, ropes of twisted grass, teams of workers numbering in the hundreds hauling in coordinated shifts, is not impossible in principle. Experimental archaeology has tested versions of it. It produces encouraging results with smaller stones. But the honest technical literature consistently notes that the two hardest problems are not the transport and not the shaping taken separately. The hardest problem is what happens when both requirements meet at the same moment. Moving a 300-ton block up a mountain slope is a triumph of organization. Placing that same block into a wall so that its shaped underside, with its precise concave geometry, settles flush against the shaped tops of the stones already seated below it, with gaps so fine that a sheet of paper will not slide into the seam, is a different category of problem. You cannot tap a 300-ton stone to adjust it. You cannot easily lift it back out to shave a high spot and try again. And at Sacsayhuaman, the machine noticed something that adds a specific and uncomfortable detail to this picture. The most massive blocks, the ones that should by simple physics be the hardest to place precisely, are among the most precisely fitted in the entire complex. The difficulty and the precision run in the same direction, not opposite directions. Then the machine moved to the joints in a different way. Having mapped the geometry of the contacts, it began treating the points where major joints reach the upper edge of the lowest terrace wall, the same way a navigator uses marks on a ruler. It mapped those points precisely, and then asked a question that no previous researcher had framed quite this way. If a watcher stood at a fixed observational point in front of this wall, the same point across many years, and tracked the positions where the sun and moon rise against the mountain horizon across a full cycle of seasons, would those rising points correspond to any of the joint positions? The result did not arrive as a possibility. It arrived as a pattern whose statistical cleanliness forced the team to call in an astronomer to check it. Certain joints aligned with the horizon points where the sun rises at the summer and winter solstices, the 2 days each year when the sun reaches its furthest northern and southern limits and pauses before reversing. A solar alignment like that might be explained as the natural instinct of a culture that organized its calendar around the sun and that was skilled at reading the horizon. The Inca calendar was deeply solar. The winter solstice festival of Inti Raymi was the most important ceremony of the year, celebrated at Sacsayhuaman itself with thousands of participants. A connection between the wall's joints and the solstice sun is surprising, but not beyond what an attentive ancient civilization might embed in its most sacred construction. But other joints tracked something else entirely, something far more demanding: the extreme northern and southern limits of moonrise, the points on the mountain horizon that the moon only reaches at the turning points of the lunar nodal cycle, a cycle that takes 18.5 years to complete one full rotation. The major lunar standstill, as it is known among astronomers, is the moment when the moon rises at its absolute furthest point from center on the horizon. It does not announce itself. There is no single dramatic night when the moon stops and reverses. The standstill is only knowable by systematic observation across years, comparing this winter's furthest point against the furthest point of a winter years before, building a record across time that no single watcher's memory can hold. It is knowledge that has to be inherited, handed from one generation to the next across 18-year cycles, because only someone who has been watching long enough to complete a cycle can recognize when it has closed. And this knowledge was there, the machine reported, encoded in the spacing of those stone joints in the wall that every previous study had classified as a military fortification. The astronomer who was brought in to check the findings expected to find a coincidence and debunk it in an afternoon. That afternoon became several days. When the sky alignments were recalculated against the horizon, as it would have appeared from that location during the original construction period, accounting for the slow drift of the Earth's precession over centuries, the match tightened rather than weakened. The verdict was definitive. This was not decoration. This was not coincidence. Somebody had been keeping time in this wall. The machine did not stop with the sky. Having established the astronomical layer, it turned to the stones themselves. Not what they looked like, but what they were made of, and what they would do when energy moved through them. It had access to geological survey data, mineral content analyses, density profiles from multiple decades of study. And when it sorted the blocks, not by their position in the wall and not by their size, but by their acoustic properties, by their capacity to carry and amplify low-frequency vibration, something emerged that no human analysis had ever flagged, because no human analysis had ever thought to ask the question this way. The blocks with the deepest acoustic response, the ones best suited to carrying the kind of low, felt rather than heard vibration that acoustic engineers specifically target when they want a space to feel resonant and significant, were not the stones quarried closest to the site. They were not the easiest stones to obtain. By every practical measure of construction logistics, they were the hardest possible choices. Denser, heavier, sourced from locations further away, requiring transport across terrain more difficult than the closer quarries. And they had been placed in the positions where the acoustic model indicated the sound would naturally gather and concentrate. Not approximately in those positions, precisely in those positions. Acoustic engineers were brought in to test this finding physically. People who spend their professional lives designing recording environments and concert spaces, chasing resonance and eliminating dead zones. They arrived skeptical in the practical way that technical experts are skeptical. They took their own measurements in the open spaces in front of the great terraces and in the enclosed areas between the walls. What they recorded was not easy to dismiss. The geometry of the terraces, the same spacing that the AI had already shown was tracking celestial events on the mountain horizon, was also shaping the behavior of sound in that space. The frequency band. The wall geometry concentrated was the band that acoustic engineers specifically work to produce when they want a space to feel important to the human body. The one that registers not in the ear, but in the chest. One engineer, when asked to summarize the result plainly, said something that has stayed with everyone who heard it. He said that if a client came to his studio and asked him to build a space that did exactly what this wall does with sound, using nothing but the mass and geometry of stone at that scale, with no electronics, no amplification, no modern intervention of any kind, he would have told that client it was not achievable. Then he spent 2 days standing inside a space that had been doing it continuously for 600 years. Here's the detail that should stop you from letting any of this slide past as separate curiosities. The spacing that encodes the solar and lunar calendar, and the spacing that tunes the acoustic behavior of the terraces are not two different measurements. They are the same measurement doing two things simultaneously. The distances between the major joints that align with the solstice sun and the lunar standstill are the same distances that shape how sound moves across the stone surfaces. You cannot adjust one without breaking the other. Changing a joint position to improve the astronomical alignment would shift the acoustic tuning. Moving a stone to improve the resonance would displace a celestial marker. The two systems are locked together because they were designed together. And designing them together, solving both problems at the same time before a single block was quarried, required a level of mathematical sophistication that should be impossible to reconcile with the absence of any written record showing it existed. The machine pulled back further. It stopped reading the wall joint by joint and began reading the entire site as a single system. It mapped the terraces, the outlying foundations, the scattered structural remains that survey crews had logged for generations as separate elements. It looked at all of them together from above, searching for whether the relationships between structures separated by too much distance for any single builder to walk between in a working day contained any geometric meaning. And the answer was not a picture or a symbol. It was a set of angular relationships, tying structures to each other across the full scale of the site, in lines that connected a foundation on one ridge to a doorway on another, and where two such lines crossed, a third structure sat waiting at the intersection. The geometry operated at landscape scale. It required a view from above, or the ability to hold the entire plan in a coordinating mind before construction began, or a machine. And it had been sitting plainly in the accumulated survey data for 3 centuries, invisible the way a word is invisible when you are standing inside the letter. A surveyor who checked the angles independently, without seeing the machine's output first, came back and said the alignments were not approximate. He said to place those structures and those relationships across that terrain, with the river and the ridgelines in between, would require a way of fixing position and direction that he associated with precision instruments. And then he said the thing that stays with you afterward. He said whoever laid this out was not building separate structures. They were building one structure, and it was the size of the valley. And then the machine ranked everything. It ordered the entire data set by precision, the tightness of the joints, the accuracy of the alignments, the closeness of the acoustic tuning. And it set that ranking against the dates. The dates ran backward. The oldest work, the stones laid first at the foundation of the oldest terrace, carried the finest tolerances. Recent geological work published in late 2025 confirmed through petrographic analysis that the stones from the earliest construction phase show material properties and surface characteristics that indicate an extraordinary level of informed selection. Builders choosing specific rock types based on properties like density and mineral structure, that would only matter if the builder understood in advance what those properties would do inside a finished wall. The later work, added in subsequent construction phases, matched that standard less closely. Not by much, but consistently. The early joints sit closer to geometric perfection than the joints cut generations later. The earliest astronomical alignments are the most precisely matched to the sky. The skill curve does not rise through the construction history of this site. It descends. Whoever built the first layers understood something that those who came after understood a little less. They were not learning this. They were inheriting it and slowly losing it. The machine also found something in the final phase of the site's use that no study had previously identified in this specific form. The last stones placed were sealed, carefully, deliberately. The most critical joints were packed and protected against weather in a way consistent with someone who intended those joints to survive for a very long time without maintenance. The site was not abandoned in panic or in flight. It was closed. Put away with care as something too important to destroy and too large to take with you. Whoever made that final decision understood that what they were closing held more than stone. It held a record of something. And they trusted the stone to keep that record until someone came along with the precision and the patience to read it back. That someone may now be us. The machine is how we open the note. The 3D laser scans published in 2026 have given us a map of the contact surfaces. The acoustic engineers have measured what the geometry does to sound. The astronomers have confirmed what the joint spacing does to the sky. 3 systems. One set of measurements, built into a wall on a ridge above a city in the Andes by people who, according to everything we have, had no written plans, no iron, and no wheel, and who somehow solved for all 3 at the same time before the first stone was ever cut. The wall is still there. The measurements are still in the stone. The machine found them, and the only question left is whether we are finally sharp enough to understand what they mean.